Okay, now we're going to do the homework review on page 46 and 47. And I will pick out sample problems. Now, I think you're all pretty good on 1 through 4, so I won't review for that. But for number 5, says y minus the absolute value of x minus y, and they tell you x is negative 2.5 and y is 0.8. Okay, so first I'm going to substitute. So y is 0.8 minus the absolute value of negative 2.5 minus 0.8. So now, inside the absolute value is what I have to simplify first. And I have subtraction. Well, when I see subtraction, I change it to plus the opposite. So now I am adding together two negatives. Since the sign is the same, I add them together and keep the sign. So that becomes negative 3.3. Now, a common mistake people make right here is they see minus a negative. But that's not the case, because the absolute value bar says stop. First, you have to take the absolute value of 3.3. The absolute value of 3.3 is 3.3. So now I do 8/10 minus 3.3. When I see subtraction, I change it, leave, change, opposite. So now I have a negative 3.3 that I'm adding to a 0.8. So who's going to win this tug of war? Well, the negatives are going to win. How much are they going to win by? I don't know. Let me find the difference between 3.3 and 0.8. And it becomes 2.7. So, silly mistake, 2.5. How many of you caught my mistake? So it's negative 2.5. Okay? So that's number 5. There was a lot to remember there. Now let's go over number 6, because I think number 6 is equally as difficult. So, negative 2 minus negative 8 plus 2. I don't do minus a negative, I say stop. Simplify what's in the absolute value first. I'm adding a negative and a positive. The negatives are going to win. How much are the negatives going to win by? I don't know. I'll find the difference between 8 and 2. And the answer is negative 6. I'm still saying stop. What's the absolute value of negative 6? It's 6. So negative 2 minus 6. Now I say leave, change, opposite. What's a negative plus a negative? It is a greater negative. They're on the same team, we just add them together. Okay? Now, we're going to find the mean. We're going to look at number 8, because this has decimals. And let's find the mean of these numbers. Now, the best way to handle this, and I strongly suggest you do it my way, is add the negatives together first, then add the positives together. So I'm going to add 5.3 and 2.8, and that's negative 8.1. I'm going to add 3.6 and 2.5 together, and that's 6.1. Now I'm going to add one negative with one positive. My answer's obviously going to be negative, because there's more negatives than positives. How many more negatives than positives? I don't know. Let me find the difference. Difference means subtract. 2. So the answer here, the sum of all these, is negative 2. Now, a common mistake people make on the quiz is they stop. But did the question say find the sum, or did the question say find the mean? it says find the mean. So I have to divide by 1, 2, 3, 4. So this means it's -2 divided by 4, which I can just change to -1/2. I just simplify it. Okay? So don't forget when you're finding the mean to divide at the end. Now, let's turn to page 47. Now, 47 has you evaluate. It has you plug in numbers. So let's look at number 1, 4C. C equals -1 1/2. The most common mistake people make when evaluating here is they plug in the wrong number. So let's be careful that C really is -1 1/2. So now I have to multiply an integer by a mixed number. Well, I know I always have to change my mixed number into a fraction, improper fraction. So I'm going to change 4 into an improper fraction too. 2 times 1 is 1, plus 2 is 3. So this is 3/2. Now, I broke my own rule. My rule was always find the sign, put it on the line. What is a positive times a negative? It's always going to be a negative. So now I can ignore that that's a negative, because some of you get confused when you're multiplying and adding. So 2 times 1 is 1 plus 2 is 3. So now I'm just going to do 4/2 4 over 1 times 3 over 2. I know my answer is negative. I can cross simplify, and my answer is -6. Okay? Now, number 2 is B times D. Well, B is 5/6. D is 2 1/3. I know I can't multiply with mixed numbers. I have to change it to an improper fraction. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 is 7/3. And unfortunately here, there's nothing I can do to cross simplify. So 5 times 7 is 35. 6 times 3 is 18. They do not have a common factor, so that's actually simplified. You could change it into a mixed number, but you don't have to. Just leave it just like that. Okay? Now, let's do number 6. So 6 is A plus C times D. A is -1/4 plus C -1 1/2 times D 2 1/3. So now I have basically 2 problems. First, I have to multiply this. So a negative times a positive is going to be a negative. So I'm going to get rid of that. I know it's negative. This is 3/2 times 7/3. So I can cross out the 3's, and that's -7/2. So I'm adding -1/4 plus -7/2. Well, I have to change my -7/2 into fourths, and that would be -14/4. So -1/4 plus -14/4 is -15/4. A negative plus a negative is just a greater negative. Okay? Now, let's see. A tricky one here definitely is number 8. So let's look at number 8. This is the opposite of B over K. So it's the opposite of B is -16.4 all over 1.6. Now, -16.4 over 1.6 is going to be a negative number, because a negative divided by a positive is a negative. This is saying, what's the opposite of a negative number? Well, the opposite of a negative number is positive. So my answer is going to be positive, and I'm going to get rid of these signs, because decimal division's hard enough without the signs. Now let's go over that again to make sure everybody's clear on this. It said do the opposite of negative 16.4 over 1.6. A negative divided by a positive is a negative. The opposite of a negative is a positive. Okay? So now what I have to do is 16.4 divided by 1.6. I have to move this decimal over 1, this decimal over 1. So I'm really going to do 164 divided by 16. 16 goes into 16 once. I have 4 remaining. Now, 16 does not go into 4. So I have to put a 0, bring down another. Now 16 goes into 40 2 times. And 16 goes into 85 times. So my answer is 10.25, and it's positive. Okay? Now, we will do number 10. N squared W. So n is negative 1.1 squared times 12.3. Now we're going to do the sign, put it on the line. What is a negative squared? It's a negative times a negative. A negative times a negative is a positive. And a positive times a positive is a positive. So I'm going to get rid of that sign so I'm not confused. My answer is going to be positive. 1.1 times 1.1. I count the number of numbers after the decimal, 1, 1, a total of 2, which means I'm going to move my decimal over, once I get the answer, 2 places to the left. 1 times 1 is 1, and then 1, 1. So I get 121. I move it over 1, 2, and I get 1.21. So now I'm multiplying 12.3 times 1.21. Notice there's no reason to line up the decimal places, because the decimal places, I can even get rid of it. It's irrelevant once I've counted them. So 1, put down the 0, 2 times 3 is 6, 4, 2, put down 2 zeros, 3, 2, 1, 3, 8, 8, 4, 1. Now I move my decimal over, 1, 2, 3, and my answer is 14.883. And that's the end of this video.